G'day everyone, my name is Zach and welcome back to Printed. Today I'm simply going to be tackling one of the biggest things that I dislike about the new Games Workshop model. And you can't argue that the models nowadays are the most detailed and coolest things they've ever made, which I do agree with. And besides talking about the details and maybe having too many, the biggest thing that I hate about them is the fact that they're all monopose. That like, if I'm buying multiple boxes of the same thing, you're getting the same pose in every single squad if you make them the way the instructions want you to. And even though I'm not a master converter, I do want to try and get my skills honed. So today I'm going to be painting and slightly converting some Scorpec destroyers, which I have a tiny little Necron army and I want to make them kind of unique. And these new models make up 90% of the stuff that I can build. So I figured we'd jump in, have a bit of a play, and see what we can make out of it. So without further ado, let's go. When it came to starting this conversion, I made sure to cut out all the pieces that I would need for every single model. I first started by going through and testing how everything fits. I want to make sure that I know exactly what I'm doing and how to put this model back together, because once we start making cuts and changes and things, it does make life a little bit harder. And once it's done, we can't really go back, so it's better to be safe than sorry. Now, I'm not very familiar with this kit, so I figured that going through, just making sure where things go would give me a general gist of how I wanted to move the pose. And although I don't really know what I'm doing, I'm just kind of working around things and testing what would work. Now I started with this guy with the two blades. I wanted to give him a pose that was a little bit more terrifying and give him a little bit more power. So to do that, I just carefully snipped off the arms so that I could reposition them later. Now when you're doing these sort of conversions, you do want to make sure that you clean up any of the tabs and things that are left over from when you cut it. This will make it a little bit easier to kind of repose it and make sure that like you're going to get a nice solid surface between the two bits. So with this guy, I decided to kind of raise his things up, almost like he's challenging someone. Now, this was a little bit tricky, but after fiddling around with it for a little while, I got a picture in my head of what I wanted to do. Now, my apologies for the weird zoomy outness of this. I was actually trying to film this between a magnifying glass, as my camera can't zoom all the way in to where I'd like. But I did grab some super glue, spray some accelerant on the arm that I wanted to move, and then just gently pose this in a place where I was happy with it. Usually you'd want to pin this and then put a rod through it so that you have a lot of strength in the joint. But unfortunately I am very lazy, so I decided just to slap a bunch of super glue and it was done immediately. Hurrah! Now I wasn't super happy with this pose and I decided that I really wanted to change his head. So I carefully set the two pistons next to his head and then carefully cut it away. And as you can see, I just test fit it where I wanted, trimmed off the extra bits, and then just slapped it straight in that hole. Now, seeing as I got rid of the two pistons, it kind of made the head look a little bit less bulky as it was before. And I had seen Pete the Wargamer do this in one of his videos, so I decided to grab a little bit of sprue and then gently warm it up with my blowtorch. Now, you want to be very, very careful when you're doing this as you are dealing with fire, and you want to make sure that you're doing it in a very open space, because there are a bit of fumes that come off of this, and this is probably the last thing you want to be breathing. So I warmed it up and then gently stretched it for a while, and fortunately enough, the plastic does actually cool very, very quickly. So I cut two piston-esque length bits and then just gently placed them in the head. Now, as you can see, I did actually struggle a lot with this because they are very small pieces, and trying to get them exactly where you want was a little bit of test of my patience. But at the end, I think he looks awesome. Now, I am actually doing all four of these guys at once. There's 3 Scorpec destroyers and a Cryptomancer, I do believe. Similar to what we did before, I did actually just grab my blowtorch and gently position the head in a slightly pinned spot. Unfortunately with this, you will lose a little bit of detail. The plastic is very soft and malleable, and on the underside of this, it did actually get rid of a lot of detail. So just remember that if you would like to do it. I did repeat this process for a little bit more of the models and the other Scorpec destroyers that I built. But with that said and done, it's time to get into the paintwork. Grabbing my little makeup brush and then also some lead belcher, I went around the model and carefully highlighted it up. I mostly try to keep this to the areas that were upward facing and not focus too much on the bottom. Doing so will give us a nice little gradient. And if you are using an airbrush, this is a super simple step. I could have for this video, but I wanted to show that you could do this entire process with just a dry brush and your paintbrush, just to show that this process can actually be done without any fancy tools or extra painting bits. And then this is a bit of a comparison between the one that I've just highlighted up and one of the regular guys. As you can see, that color really makes the models pop. Next up, I did grab some Vallejo metal color silver, and using this in a similar way to the lead belcher, I just loaded up my brush and carefully went over maybe the top 25% of the model. Fortunately enough with this paint, it is very runny. So I ended up grabbing a piece of paper towel to kind of dry it out a little bit and give us that really nice metallic flaky look. I will admit, painting Necrons is one of the easiest and funnest processes ever. You can either make it as complicated or as simple as you'd like. And then we've just got a little bit of a comparison here of what the models look like before I do all the upper highlights. And as you can see, it does make another massive difference. With 2 steps, we've basically got 98% of the model done, and it's very, very satisfying. For my Necrons, I've got them in a specific dynasty. I don't exactly know if there is a name for it. The main color scheme kind of revolves around a nice deep dark jade-esque color. I grabbed some Despair green and just went over any panels that I wanted to be that nice green later. This gives us a lot of depth and tone to work with, and I'm very excited. Now, as you can see, it is also slightly transparent, so you can use that to your advantage and kind of make it look like the panels have been beaten over time. Or if you'd like a more opaque look, you can just chuck a second coat on that, which is very, very nice. Now, for the Chronomancer, I did actually grab some Vallejo Game Air Black, and I'm actually going to use this for a little bit of a wash. You can use Null Oil if you like, or I would recommend darkening down a paint like Black Legion. I more or less want the silver on this to be kind of dark, similar to how the box art is. I really like the contrast of the high metallic silvers and the actual metal itself. So watering it down roughly 2 to 1, I went over the entire model where I wanted to be that darker metal. Next up, grabbing some Despair green and some Cyberite green, I'm going to come in and give some highlights to all of our panels. Mixing it roughly about 50-50, I just went over all the top areas to bring those out. And I think this is already looking really awesome. This process is super simple, and if you really want, you can either leave it at this step or do what I do and slowly mix a little bit more Cyberite green and then highlight the panels up gently. Now, if you're like me and you want to do another step, basically what I'm going to do is I want to mix a little bit more Cyberite green, and I'm going to start just doing the very, very upper edges of these panels. If you wanted to make it look a little bit more rustic and kind of aged, you can just dab it on the highlights and it gives you a nice deep texture. I'm also using this color to give a slight highlight to any edges that I'd like to pick out. This kind of brightens the model up a little bit and just draws your attention to them. Similar to highlighting the Space Marine shoulder pads or the head, it really makes the model pop. Now that I've finished with the highlights, it's time to jump onto his weapons and some of the glow effects that I want to try out with him. Now, using a little bit of white grey from Vallejo, I'm just going to quickly go over all of the weapons and things. This gives us a solid base for when we're doing the energy weapons and does about 90% of the coverage that we need. It's not a pure white, but it saves us doing about 30 layers of white ink over the top and just saves a bunch of time. For the next step, we're just going to tackle some of the glow effects that I'd like to do on the model. Now, grabbing some of that white ink, we're just going to dab it into any of the areas that we want to be glowy. It doesn't really matter about the coverage because being such a small area, most of the pigment just pulls up in it and gives us a one coat mix. I'm going to mostly focus on things like his chest and his eyes. These are kind of points that you want to make pop because they're right near the head and you want to make sure everyone sees those details. Now, once we've got every area covered with that white, I do just want to come in with some Tesseract Glow, or you can also come in with any colored ink that you'd like for your glow to be. This is a super simple step, and after putting it over everything, I do come back in with a slightly wet brush, and as you can see, I just clean up the areas. This feathers the paint a little bit and gives us a nice little painted glow. It's super simple to do, and as you can see, it really makes the model pop. Now, for the next part, I did want to mask the models and test out a couple of different ways that we could paint the glow on this weapon. Now, I am going to be showing you how to use an airbrush for this step, but as well, I will be showing you how to use a paintbrush to achieve the exact same effect. So don't fret if you see an airbrush being used in this video, solely for the purpose of getting them done quick, and I will demonstrate how to deal with the brush. Now, I wasn't quite sure how I wanted to mask these models. I do have Vallejo mask, which I have had problems with in the past because it is very, very sticky and doesn't give me as crisp a line as I'd like. So first and foremost, we're just going to try by taping all of these models off to see if we can get a nice crisp line and if it's really worth the time. Now, I will admit it was very, very fiddly to do. I had to cut little strips, put them on, make sure that they were fully attached to the model and that they weren't going to fall off. As you can see, it has given us a very crisp line, so I'm excited to see what this looks like at the end. Now, for the Vallejo liquid mask, I basically just paint this according to the contours of the model itself. If you're lucky and have a model with a very, very sharp edge, it makes life so much easier. But if it's like these guys and they have kind of a small beveled edge, it does make it a little bit harder to do this step and get a very crisp, clean line. Now, coming with our airbrush, I'm just going to use a few different colors, starting off with the light colors and then slowly working our way to the darker ones. For this step, I'm just following how exactly they painted it on the Games Workshop website. I can't remember exactly what I was going to do in my head, but it just makes it a lot easier when you've got a reference in front of you. Starting off with some Tesseract Glow, I just went over roughly about 80% of the model, leaving a couple of slightly white areas at the end. This gives us our nice glow effect. Next up, just using any slightly darker green that you'd like, go over the model and just went over the middle of this. This, as you can see, it slowly builds up that transition and really makes the model pop. Now, using the darkest green in my collection, I just went over the middle, and I was very, very specific about keeping this a nice small area. You want to roughly cover about maybe 5 to 10% of what you did before. And as you can see, it looks fantastic. Now, after pulling the masking tape off of this, I was actually really impressed with the overall look. It gave us a nice, crisp, clean line, but I don't really think it was worth the time. It took me roughly about 5 to 10 minutes to mask just this side off. And at the exact same time, I did also realize that I didn't have to mask anything at this point. If you are painting the first layer of your glow effect, make sure to just paint the whole thing first. Give it a varnish, or if you'd like to protect the paint, gloss or satin, whatever your choice, and then mask the side that is already painted. This will save you a bunch of time and make sure that you're not double handling anything. Because I realized that way too long, and now I have to mask the area that I've already painted, which is fantastic. Now I'm going to show you how easy or hard it is to take off the Vallejo liquid mask. Now for this step, you have to be very, very careful. I'm actually using tweezers for this, but it was a little bit of a pain because I did scrape a small amount of the actual mask off itself. I highly recommend that if you do use this stuff, don't throw the old ball of liquid mask out. What I do is I keep this on my desk, and every time that I have to take this sort of thing off, as the ball gets bigger, it does actually get easier because it sticks to itself. Now, this line was actually very, very clean, and I was pretty happy with it. Unfortunately, the footage of me painting one of the blades by hand was lost, and I'm just going to take a photo and quickly explain what I've done. So basically for this model, I used the exact same colors that I did before, and I watered them down, including the Tesseract Glow, and slowly built that transition up. So starting with the Tesseract Glow, as you can see on the edges, I kind of painted it in there, and then slowly worked my way through the other colors. I did this kind of rough and just wet blend between them, which means the transition's not as good as I wanted originally. But if you have a little bit more time than me, what you can do is start with your Tesseract Glow very, very wet, and just gently glaze up through each of the colors until you get to a point where you're 100% happy. I'm so sorry about losing that footage because I was very excited to show this effect being painted on. Now that the majority of the model is 100% painted, I'm just going to come in with some different paints. I've got a pigment for a little bit of the base, and I've also got some Dirty Down Rust, which is one of my favorite paints ever. A big tip with the Dirty Down Rust is you do want to make sure that you warm it up in warm, not boiling water. I did boiling water once, and unfortunately it blew the bottom of the bottle out, which was very, very annoying because I could never set it exactly where I wanted to. As you can see, I've just warmed it up in a mug here. And I'm just going to take this paint and basically slap it over the entire base. I want these Necrons to look like they're on an old tumor that has slowly started to decay, and that's why they're starting to wake up. Now basically with this one, I just came through and slapped it over the entire base. This gives us a nice little rust effect, and if you really want it to pop, I highly recommend getting a hairdryer. I was very lazy and kind of made a silly decision by using a blowtorch. As you can see in the footage, it does make the paint really, really nice and rusty, but on one of the models I went a little bit too overzealous and started to melt it slightly. So learn from my actions and don't do exactly as I do. Now, if you're not super happy with how the coverage is going on the Dirty Down, what I recommend is grabbing a paintbrush with some water and just slightly washing it over. This takes the effect down a little bit and gives us more of a realistic rusty look. Now, to finish this base off, I did come down with that red pigment powder before and slapped it over a few areas in the base. Now I want these bases to look slightly rusted, but not too dirty and rusted. Unfortunately enough, I did kind of go a little bit too much with this model, but fortunately this is a bit of a test and we can always change it later. Last but not least, the only thing to do is chuck some black on the base rims, and now it's time for the big reveal. Now as you can see, I'm super happy with how these models turned out. The transitions between all the blades and just everything in general looks fantastic. It really didn't take me that long to paint these guys, roughly about maybe an hour to an hour and a half for the entire squad, which if you ask me is a fantastic amount of time to spend on a Warhammer army. I could imagine painting maybe an entire combat patrol to, if I am really cocky, maybe an entire army in roughly between like a weekend to an entire week, which if you guys would like to see that, make sure to leave a comment down below because it's probably something I'd definitely be excited to do. Now, I just want to give a massive thank you to every single person who has reached this far in the video. I know it has been a hot minute since I last posted a video, but fortunately enough, I've got a couple of projects and models built and things lined up, so we should at least get one video per week / every fortnight, just so that I can keep you guys entertained. So if you did indeed enjoy this video, make sure to leave a like on it. Don't forget to subscribe. We are very close to hitting YouTube Platinum, and I'm very, very excited. So a massive thank you to everyone at home for getting this far. So until next time, everyone, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you later. Thank you for watching, and happy hobbying. Bye.